Welcome to Natural Cycles Food and Shelter. This event was originally held on 16th July 2022 at Marina Barrage, Singapore, in conjunction with the Plus Pavilion Exhibition. So you can see a beautiful picture of the Plus Pavilion here, courtesy of the Swiss Embassy, Singapore. And here we are on the roof of Marina Barrage after our tour of the Sustainable Singapore Gallery. We've made this recording so that those who missed the event or those who came but want to listen again, as well as our friends around the world, can enjoy the talks from the comfort of your home. There are 6 speakers. The speakers come from various backgrounds, each addressing different aspects of sustainability. But what we have in common is our understanding that we have to work within natural cycles. And because it enables us to employ low energy solutions which harness the forces of nature to satisfy our fundamental needs for food and shelter without damaging the life-giving ecosystem on which we depend. Let's meet the speakers. So for a start, my name is Loke, and I'm the founding president of the Circle for Human Sustainability and partner in Loke Architects. As a practicing architect and somewhat of a closet economist, I believe that humanity cannot be sustainable without changing our current GDP growth-based economic system, which actually incentivizes high consumption and wasteful behavior. So what I like to do is actually tell people, give people information, especially scientifically based information on energy and resource constraints, so that we can all collectively ask the right questions and thereby put ourselves on the right path towards true sustainability, not just superficial things, but really change the way that we live. Next, maybe I'll invite Nicholas to say something about himself.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so I'm a bioscience student. I specialized in molecular cell biology. So I have an interest in reading up with animal kingdoms, animal studies, also to microbial interactions, microorganisms, and a lot of biological processes that goes on within an organism. So so I'm running a farm together with Jay at a Beauty World Center. So we're doing a lot of composting. We are going to do a lot of composting activities there on top of an urban farm. So maybe I hand over to Jay to introduce.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, hi everyone. Jay here, or Xiang. I studied horticulture and architecture, and I've been in the industry in the last 7 years, based largely in Singapore and Jakarta in the past. And now that I'm back in Singapore, actually when I came back in Singapore, it was more or less during the eve of COVID. And I think because of that, we were sort of forced to do something with our lives, right, rather than working all the time. And Nick and I, we actually rented a plot of land at Yishun to do an experimental farm. And from there, we learned how to grow things, how to made a lot of mistakes actually, and that was the stepping stone truly for our little farm at Beauty World Center. So what we are hoping to achieve at Beauty World Center is to really to make it into a platform where people is able to come, learn about composting, recycle their food waste, and see how those food waste can be converted into compost that then feeds into the plant, and the plant then produces edible parts for us to consume. And then from there, we contribute again through food waste, and so forming a loop in the food cycle. So today's discussion is actually about one of the key biological agents in compost, which is earthworms. We'll talk about that in a little while. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Xiang. Tim, would you like to tell us something about yourself?
Yes, hi. I'm Tim Tan from Affordable Abodes. This is an organization which was operating in Malaysia to focus on building low-cost housing for the less fortunate. So our mission was really more about empowering people to provide them not just a home, but also a livelihood from what we do. And the way we build housing is to use a plant called kanaf. That's the kanaf plant in a picture behind me. These are tropical hibiscus species which grow very rapidly. In 4 months, we can use various components of the plant to build housing with. So we'll be exploring that later on in today's talk, and we welcome, of course, ideas about how we can improve on this. Thank you. Thanks,
Tim. And over to Kevin.
Hi everyone. My name is Kevin. I'm a founding principal of Studio Slim, award-winning design office based in Singapore. We have built works so far in Singapore, Japan, China, and India. I've spent collectively, I think, over 10 years overseas in Beijing, Tokyo, and London. And what I'm interested in is sustainability, I think, for the built environment. In particular, I have a special interest in materials. So in terms of primitive materials, where materials that are easily sourced from the earth or from the surroundings, and how do we imbue them with, make them relevant to modern day needs, right? Recently also we have been involved in a big project in India, and that has in a way brought me down to earth, seeing the everyday life and sustainability. There is a way of life, is not really a good thing to have. It's just part of their life. And that has also made me more aware of how to deal with material sources, how to look at the recyclability of materials in terms of the construction industry. And today we hope to share with you our insights into the building and design process of the Plus Pavilion, which was showcased at Marina Barrage and will subsequently be transported for its second life at EHL campus. Right, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. So next we will have Laurent. So over to you, Laurent.
Hello, everyone. My name is Laurent. I'm the head of Singapore for Hearing Timber Technology. We are a very traditional 5th generation company, purely specialized in very innovative and sustainable construction. So we are purely using wood or timber as the material, but we process it in a way that we are able to compete with concrete and steel for structural applications. So today I will be happy to, to introduce you a bit towards the world of wood architecture, wood construction engineering, as well as give you some insights on our most recent project that we did with a collective of partners in Singapore called the Plus Pavilion. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Laurent. So we'll get started with the talk proper now. I mentioned earlier that I'm from the Circle for Human Sustainability. So we are a transdisciplinary society just newly formed in December 2021 to bring together different professionals to look at sustainability holistically. We find that that is important because if we look at it in isolation, most of the time we solve a problem, but then we are actually creating a problem for somebody else. Our vision is to bring about human society which is in harmony with nature, where humans can flourish, enabled by a built environment that contributes to the well-being of people, and most importantly, to stay within planetary boundaries. So planetary boundaries is a concept which was introduced in 2009 by a group of scientists who decided to identify key metrics that we should be measuring to determine Earth's health. So it's a bit like when we go to a doctor and the doctor takes our blood pressure, checks our temperature and our heart rate. So these 9 metrics actually help us to determine whether Earth is healthy or unhealthy. So if you look at the 4 areas which are in red here, we quite often hear about climate change and biodiversity loss, land conversion as well, which leads to biodiversity loss. But we hardly hear about nitrogen and phosphorus loading. So I will talk a little bit more about why this is so later on. Currently, our efforts towards sustainability tend to focus on climate change and carbon emissions. And then we also hear of the term circular economy. And also we rely on high-tech solutions, and we think that all of this is going to save us and enable us to just carry on as we are right now without really making significant changes to our lifestyles. What is the circular economy? Well, this is the diagram from UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And it says that a circular economy entails markets that give incentive to reuse products rather than scrapping them and then extracting new resources. And in such an economy, all forms of waste can actually be returned to the economy or used more efficiently. So everything is supposed to go around and around, and we're supposed to need very little raw materials. So if you look at this diagram, here are all the stuff that we use, and we can reduce, reuse, recycle, remanufacture, and raw materials are represented here, so it's supposed to be just a small part. And energy is also represented here as if it were a small part. But in reality, this diagram is not quite accurate, because to reuse, remanufacture, recycle, all of this requires energy in transportation, in dismantling, in repurposing, in processing or whatever. So the only thing that doesn't require energy is for us to actually reduce our consumption. And a circular economy is not truly circular if we need to add an external source of energy. And another thing is that every time we recycle something, we can't get back the quality that we started with. So it's like a photocopier where you photocopy something and you keep on making copies of the copies. And the last copy actually would be a very poor reproduction of the first quality. So the original copy. So the same thing happens when we recycle and remanufacture things. And I talked about how we are reliant on energy for everything. Even if we reduce or recycle, we are still using fossil fuels. How reliant are we actually on fossil fuels? This is from our World in Data, tracking energy consumption from 1800 to 2019. And fossil fuels actually supplied 84% of the world's energy consumption in 2019. But that's not the full story, because if you look at coal, oil, and gas, you can see, okay, it's really significant. And then other forms of energy are much less, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, etc. But all of these actually require fossil fuels as well, because if you wanted to construct a nuclear power plant or hydropower or wind or solar, all of these actually require fossil fuels for us to mine the materials, process them, transport them, bring them to the construction site, and in the process of constructing them, we also use fossil fuels. So actually, we are just about reliant on fossil fuels for everything. Can we actually wean ourselves from fossil fuels? Well, let's see how reliant we actually are. This is actually a very good book, if you have a chance to get it. It actually gives you a very comprehensive reality check actually on different forms of energy. And there are a lot of notes in there where you can trace the sources and do further reading yourself. So it's a great book to get. I'm only going to extract a few things that are relevant to today's talk. So first thing is that, as I said, we keep hearing about climate change, but actually the most serious problem facing us is energy decline, because we are reliant on energy for everything. And in a city just cannot function at all without electricity. And apart from electricity, we are also dependent on fossil fuels for over 500,000 products. And today, since we're talking about food, we actually require 10 kilocalories of fossils to produce 1 kilocalorie of food, because we need the energy in planting, fertilizing, harvesting, distributing, processing, packaging, refrigerating, and cooking. And in nature, this is actually not possible. No other animal in the world can actually expend 10 times the amount of energy to get its food. If it did that, it would just starve to death. We also use fossil fuels to make fertilizers, and the fertilizers actually make the soil release nitrous oxide. which actually has a global warming potential 300 times greater than carbon dioxide. So we never hear about nitrous oxide, we only hear about carbon dioxide. And furthermore, when we use artificial fertilizers, we actually harm the soil ecosystem. We disturb the balance, and we make the soil too rich in nitrogen, and then it kills the soil microbes. So then we have no defense against pests and disease, and farmers end up using more pesticides. So it's really a vicious cycle. The other thing that we actually hear about a lot from the media is renewables, right? So can we actually switch to renewables? In reality, actually, we rely on fossil fuels also to mine, transport, extract, process, and manufacture so-called clean energy sources or facilities. So we look more closely at other things that we need. Apart from energy, we also need minerals to make these things that are supposed to replace fossil fuels, like electric vehicles, batteries, hydrogen fuel cells, wind turbines, solar panels, etc. If you want to know more, you can read this report by Simon Michaud on the mining of minerals and the limits to growth, published in March 2021. But for today, just a very quick snippet from it. If we look at just 6 minerals, for example, that are needed to make all these things, the first column tells you how much material you need, and the second column tells you what the production rate was for the year 2019. So assuming that every year we can produce the same amount of minerals, assuming that our mines don't reduce in yield, which is actually impossible. When you look at this column here, we will take 328 years to actually mine copper, enough to make the things that we want to make down here. Lithium, which is essential for our batteries, would take 16,000 years, and graphite 12,000, and even the best case scenario, silver, is going to take 122 years. So in reality, actually, it's just not going to happen. We are not going to be able to phase out fossil fuels, or rather replace them and live as we are living now, anytime soon, really. And another point is that all these require fossil fuels to make, as well as these minerals. So fossil fuels actually and minerals both take the earth hundreds of millions of years to make, neither of which are renewable. So when you add 2 non-renewable things, how is it that you can get things that are called renewable? So that's just not logical at all. We cannot really achieve a circular economy unless we work with natural cycles, because nature can do it without adding an external source of energy. Nature also renews when she recycles. If you look at the water cycle, we keep getting fresh water, and it goes on forever as long as we don't pollute our environment. And also, if you look at agriculture, if we are respecting nature, then cow dung gets dragged by dung beetles into the ground, which then gets decomposed by the microbes, which then nourishes the soil and fertilizes the plants, and the cow gets to eat fresh grass again. Natural cycles take time though, and because of the Industrial Revolution, we are very impatient. We have unrealistic expectations. We expect to be able to use cheap fuel, press a button, and then things just happen. And we don't have the patience to actually work with natural cycles and wait for things to happen. The other thing, of course, is that we are in this economic system that makes us pursue GDP growth and makes us prioritize productivity and profits because of the financing system, where we have to pay back loans with interest. So what is the problem with growth? Well, actually, of course, we cannot grow forever. And this report in 1972 by 4 scientists from MIT also shows us why we cannot grow forever. It's actually quite a really very impressive model for something that was done in 1972. What they applied was a systems thinking approach. That means they don't use linear logic. They look at feedback loops and also how things are actually interrelated with each other. And then they fed the interrelationships or programmed it into the computer and then simulated different outcomes from varying inputs. So the main factors that they were looking at were resources, industrial output, pollution, population, and food. Of course, this is simplified, but just like our vital signs, these are the 5 most important factors to consider if we want to study what happens when we exceed the limits to growth. So what they found was if we continue business as usual, pursuing the growth model, we're going to see environmental and economic collapse within a century, which means within this century that we're living now. So the most important thing to understand is that the limits to growth is not crystal ball gazing. They're not trying to predict the future. What they're doing is simulating different outcomes so that we can make informed decisions on where we want to go. I mentioned that it was written in 1972, and that's 50 years ago. So is it still valid? Well, it's actually been updated a few times, and the latest update is in 2004. And Gaia Harrington has actually done a study to compare empirical data against the simulated levels of the 5 basic factors. So in particular, looking at these 4 scenarios, we have BAU, which is business as usual, BAU2, which is also business as usual, but with more resources up here compared to here. And then CT is comprehensive technology, assuming that technology will save us. And then SW is stabilized world. So looking at the data, what she found was that actually BAU2 and CT align closest to empirical data. So business as usual, what we're doing right now, is actually the closest aligned, and SW, which is stabilized world, is the least closely aligned to empirical data. That's not good news for us at the moment, which means because it means that we are not headed for a stabilized world. And BAU2 actually shows a collapse pattern. What is meant by collapse pattern? Well, if you look at population and food, right? The yellow line is food, and you can see that after around 2030, food production starts dropping significantly, and that's followed by a drop in population. So it means that people are actually dying here. It means that population is being reduced because of famine and starvation. That's not good news. But what about CT? That is also aligned to empirical data up to around here. So does that mean that technology is going to save us? Are we actually on the CT path? Well, comparing the data on emissions, if we were on the CT path, then we should have seen 10% drop in emissions from 2000 to 2020. But that did not happen. So it means that actually our technological progress is not really keeping up with the simulation that technology is going to save us. So what can we do? Well, it's actually not too late, because if you look at stabilized world, we are not that far off. It's pretty close up to here, and then it starts diverging after the year 2000. But you can see that if we actually flatten industrial output from around 2010, we can actually reach the stable state where population then stabilizes and food production also stabilizes. So we are about 10 years behind time, but we're not so far off that we can't do anything. If we wait much longer, it's going to be much, much more difficult. If we wait until 2050, you can see that, it's more or less game over already. If we keep on pushing our industrial output up, by 2050, actually, we are already in a collapse situation. So we really, really must act now to change the trajectory of where we're headed. So sustainability really is about enabling life, and not just our life, but all life forms on Earth. We really must treasure life on Earth. There is no other, nothing else is as important as this. And if we look at the technology that we have, it doesn't mean that we will not continue to develop. because technology actually is just human intervention, and it's really our choice how we choose to intervene. And we can see that actually in reality, we are in a situation of energy decline. And if energy is really declining, then technology is really not about inventing more energy efficient devices, but about letting nature do most of the work, because nature does it without any external source of energy. So our intervention actually needs to be just minimal and with a very light touch. And if we do that, actually nature will provide for us. Nature will give us food and shelter as long as we need, if we work within natural cycles that are within the human time scale. So the human time scale is very important. We can't be relying on fossil fuels and minerals which take hundreds of millions of years to form. We have to be looking at other materials which we can grow, or which can grow within human lifetimes, right? So with that, I will hand on to the other speakers to give you their insights on how they're using natural cycles to actually make us sustainable. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, for setting the stage and for showing us the bigger picture, framing it through all these cycles in nature. And one of the cycles that are quite relevant to this is the cycle of nitrogen and the cycle of water in our presentation. So without further ado, today Nick and I will be sharing a little bit about what lies below the surface. Below the surface is actually a whole world of activities that are happening that we do not see. There are many microorganisms, organisms, and even plant life and of course also chemical and geological activities that are occurring below the surface that we do not always see, and perhaps because we do not always see, we sometimes take them for granted. The soil is actually housed to a very complex relationship called the soil food web, and one of the agents that is in this food web is actually none other than the earthworms. Okay, they have a very important role to play in how nutrient is being recycled and how organic matter is being sort of pulled down into the soil to replenish the nutrients into the soil, and their activities, their very being actually helps to improve soil structure. So we'll be covering very broadly the nutrient cycle, what are earthworms, their anatomy, their life cycle, and why are they important. So the nutrient cycle. The nutrient cycle is very much similar to the water cycle. So the water is brought up from the oceans through evaporation to form clouds. The cloud move inland, and when it accumulates, it gets denser and heavier. And when it reaches its peak, water would actually fall down as rain to replenish the water in the soil, in the mountains, and so on. And excess water would sort of flow down the river and drain back into the ocean, and the cycle continues, right? So in the nutrient cycle, it's not that different actually. What happens is all organic matter, okay, and also of course inorganic matter such as your rocks, right, your geological elements, they all consist of nutrients or chemical compounds, right? Chemical elements that sort of come together, that forms a compound, okay? Be it a stone, a tree, an animal, so on and so forth. So they all consist of nutrients. So do we as humans actually. So for the purpose of illustration, I will be using this image here and an example of a tree. So what happens is as the tree grows, it drops its leaves, and we wonder, why do the tree drop its leaves? Why must it be so messy, right? We are people like us in the urban environment. We always feel that all these leaves falling down, we need to clean it, we need to sweep it, we need to bag it, and then we need to throw it away, right? But that is not the truth in nature. There's nothing in nature that is a waste. Everything in nature has a purpose. And so the falling down, the fallen leaves has a purpose too. And its purpose is to deliver nutrients to areas that, from one area to another area. So when a leaf falls, perhaps the wind will carry the leaf to another location. An animal could walk past it and then break the leaves down. And then as the leaves are broken down and touching the soil surface, other microorganisms like the earthworms would actually come to eat the leaves, and then they will store whatever they need into their bodies, and whatever in excess they would actually excrete out. So whatever that the earthworms excrete out would then be part of the soil organic matter, which would then be actually used by other plants to form other parts of their body. So the plant roots, for example, will be responsible for absorbing the nutrients from the soil and then sort of bringing it through the plant itself to be used to create other parts, like whether it's a leaf or a flower or a fruit. And if it is a fruit, for example, let's say if it's a banana, it would be perhaps very attractive to a monkey, and the monkey would grab the banana and move it to another location to feed the family perhaps. And then any nutrients, let's say for example, that's not eaten by the monkey, such as the banana peel, would then be thrown away, right? And it is not a waste because that banana peel has moved from one location to another location. And when that banana peel goes onto the soil, it gets broken down and the nutrients is then released at that new location, and then to continue its cycle again. So in essence, that is what the nutrient cycle is. And earthworms are one small biological agent in this very huge complex system. And I'll allow Nicholas here to share a little bit more on that.
Thanks, Xiang. Alright, so what are earthworms? Earthworms are terrestrial invertebrates. They belong to the family called the phylum Annelida. Annelida meaning ring. And if you observe closely, earthworms have these little bendings in them. Those bendings are the ring structures and they are the segments. In different species of earthworms, the total number of segments will differ. And the distance between the head to the clitellum to the tail will also differ by the number of segments. So that is how we actually tell different species apart. So earthworms have a very basic body structure. Their digestive system is essentially one long tube from the mouth to its end. They have a closed circulatory system, so their blood is contained within vessels like us humans. And earthworms actually have 5 mini hearts. The heart is actually a modified blood vessel that contains contracting action. Earthworms don't have lungs, so how do they breathe? They actually breathe through their skin. Earthworms also sense their environment using their skin. So on their skin, they have light receptors, like light receptors in our eyes. They have heat receptors, like heat receptors in our skin. And they even have chemical sensors, much like our tongue, for them to detect their surrounding. And this is also why in a lot of composting guides, things like acidic food are not recommended, because things that sting your tongue will also sting the earthworm skin. And it is super sensitive for earthworms because they are also using it to breathe. So earthworms are hermaphrodites. They have both male and female reproductive organs. When earthworms mate, both earthworms will then go on to produce eggs. The eggs will be contained in this sac called a cocoon. This cocoon has been evolved to be able to withstand the changes in environment or unfavorable environment. Alright, it's a hard shell that prevents physical force from disturbing the eggs, and because it's a hard and dry shell, it helps to retain the moisture within, so they can survive some short periods of drought. So the eggs will then only hatch when there is favorable conditions for it to develop. Not only that, earthworms have evolved an ability to regulate their metabolism. so that they can develop based on the amount of food available. Faster if there is more, slower if there is less. So with the different types of earthworms, they can be grouped into 3 generic groups. First is your epigic earthworms. Epigic earthworms are also known as your composting earthworms. They are found on the surface litter or the surface leaf litter in a forest. So they are fast reproducers and also very voracious eaters. Next is your endogic earthworms. So endogic earthworms are slightly bigger than your epigic earthworms, slower in reproduction, and their main living environment is slightly under the leaf litter. So they are the ones that goes vertically across and produces a lot more air pockets in the soil. And your last worms are your anisic earthworms. So anisic earthworms have a habit of burrowing vertically. So this allows air movement into the much deeper layers of the soil. They normally live past 30 cm, so they are really very deep in. Because they are one of the larger types of earthworm, they also have actually a slower reproduction rate. So in Singapore, we have a few earthworm varieties for epigic earthworms that are used in composting. First is your red wiggler. It is not common, mainly because these earthworms are not native to a tropical climate. They are temperate climate earthworms. Hobbies do have them, but it's quite rare. The native earthworm is actually your Malaysian blues. And then the last one are the African night crawlers, which you can find also quite commonly in Singapore in fish shops, so as fish food or also as starting worms for composting bins. This worm is actually native to Africa, as the name implies, but because it is also a earthworm that can survive well in a warm climate, they actually do well in Singapore also. So with that, I will hand over to Xiang to wrap up with the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Nicholas, for sharing all these interesting facts about earthworms. I'll make a small conclusion, a very short conclusion about earthworms. So as you understand now that there are different types of earthworms that performs slightly different functions in the soil layer, right? But in essence, their very being, their very job, okay, is to wiggle around the earth. But this activity of wiggling actually creates a lot of tunnels, air tunnels, okay, that helps to bring in oxygen into the soil level where the roots are, because the roots also needs to breathe, right? And the same tunnels also allows water penetration. So when it rains, right, the water is able to go down to nourish the roots. And other than that, the earthworm's job is to actually go up to the surface, devour the leaves or leaf litters or any other organic matter that may fall onto the soil surface. And as they are devouring the organic matter, they break it down, they release the nutrients that is locked in that, right? And the earthworms, of course, will absorb what it needs into its body, and any excess nutrients that it does not need, it would sort of pull it out, right? And that is why we are using earthworms, right, to break down matter, and we are collecting their poo to actually fertilize the plants, right? So earthworms are, in this sense, helps to recycle nutrients, and we want to impress upon people that no matter how small the creature is, right, they do play a very big part in nature, in reducing organic matter into finer bits and releasing the nutrients within, and then to be recycled, to be reconstituted into other forms, right? So in nature, there's nothing that is considered waste, right? There's no such thing as waste in nature. Everything has a purpose, and everything is sort of recycled. It feeds other creatures, and if it doesn't feed other creatures, it feeds the soil, it feeds the plants. So everything in nature is always in this cycle of renewal. And that is why we have set up, Nicholas and I and our partners have set up a rooftop farm at Beauty World Center with some composting facilities as we will have earthworm compostings there, and we wanted to show to people that recycling of food waste is a very easy, simple, clean process. Okay, you don't have to crack your head over it. You just have to come down with your food waste and deposit it into one of our worm composting systems, and then you'll be able to see firsthand how the earthworms actually wiggle through, devour the organic matter, and create very rich pool out of it, right? And so with that, thank you very much for your time.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tim Tan from Affordable Abodes, and we build low-cost housing using biocomposite materials. We know that the effects of COVID have shown that there are a great number of disruptions to our food supply, to our raw material supply. And, this is also causing a heavy effect on our climate change, especially where construction is concerned. We're emitting 40% in our built environment. So these effects are widely shown all over the world right now with fires in places like California, and drought and shortage of water in many parts of the African continent as well. So my journey began looking into various solutions for low-cost housing, and we actually came across this quite miraculous plant called kanaf. But what is kanaf? Kanaf is a hibiscus plant. It grows very rapidly especially in tropical environments, and you can find this plant just about on any continent, especially in Southeast Asia and tropical continents of Bangladesh, Vietnam, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Malaysia as well. So what do we do with this? We actually plant the kanaf plant from seeds. It grows in 4 months to a height of about 4 meters, and we can harvest it and start manufacturing building materials with it. The benefits are that it's a much lighter material to work with, because 90% of it is actually biomass. We actually use a kind of recycled lime from another post-industrial process. So that all replaces cement and sand and granite in our construction material. To enhance the properties, we've also manufacturing now 3-meter high prefabricated wall panels to make installation easier, and also cut down on labor requirement. So a hectare of kanaf over the course of a year of planting, we'd have about 2.5 crops, and that would yield enough biomass for about 15 houses, 15 small houses. So how do we participate in this whole process of the circular economy? We're starting from farming, all right? We're providing jobs and better economic value for farmers especially farmers who are facing crop losses due to climate change right now. And from there, we'll take the materials buy the materials from them, and then we'll manufacture it using relatively simple processes into wall panels, blocks, and we've even got some roofing materials, which I'll talk about in a bit. And we can all do this, very, very quickly. We can build a house within, less than a month. The other components of the plant, the leaves especially, can be eaten by both human and animals alike. and any waste from the processing of the raw materials could also be used as fertilizer. So this house is built in Modular, where our factory was located, and it's mainly for low-cost, low-income families, as we're a social enterprise. And a standard house of about 1,000 square feet would run under 100,000 ringgit, which is much cheaper than, substantially cheaper, probably 30-40% cheaper than your conventional brick and mortar house. And this house was built in about a month, right? This is turnkey. These are turnkey prices with doors, locks, sanitation, water supply, power supply, complete, right? We also work in conjunction with Habitat for Humanity. They have a Sheltertech accelerator program, so we're looking to expand and scale up our business alongside with them as well. So this is already at the point of proof of value. We've fully commercialized these Kanaf-crete wall panels, as we call them. In Singapore, what we've done during the COVID lockdown is done some research on the Kanaf fibers, the two parts that come from the plant, which we can use for building, are the core, which is used for the blocks, and the fibers can be turned into fiber composite panels for roofing, for example, or for window frames, door frames, furniture. There are many uses for this. So during lockdown, we were very fortunate to get a grant from Design Singapore, together with our partner studio Sclim. We developed some interesting fiber reinforced biocomposite materials to replace roofing, standard roofing, which is steel or aluminum or clay tiles. And we've also developed technology that will insulate the building against thermal heat, just as Kanaf-crete also insulates buildings against thermal heat. The roofing can also help to insulate the building much better than the conventional roofing materials. So that makes the environment much cooler and gives it much more comfortable feeling as well. This is a picture, this image of the Kanaf Pavilion that we're focused on in this talk. And we use Kanaf on the skylights in the central skylight area and along the eaves of the building. These are Kanaf fiber composites. And I wanted to show, the difference between in this picture, especially with, the MBS towers behind, just to juxtapose the the meaning of sustainability in construction, right? Out there, they're using, hundreds or millions of dollars of power supply in this type of construction, and it's in the construction itself has produced a tremendous amount of CO2. So we have a choice to make, right? And that's, I think, our responsibility to think about how we're going to impact our environment, not just now, but especially in time to come. So that's what I wanted to share for today. I'm Tim. I'm glad to entertain questions from you. Please drop me a note if you like. Thank you very much. I'll leave. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Hi, so we are here to talk about the modular, scalable, sustainable design of the Plus Pavilion currently being showcased at Marina Barrage in Singapore. I'll bring on the journey behind the thought process of the pavilion and how the various building parts contribute to this sustainable agenda. So as you can see from this diagram, what we want to illustrate is how we were inspired by the Swiss cross, which was the primary starting point from which we started the design. We took the Swiss cross and we extrapolated the lines to create a diamond-shaped shelter. The pavilion itself composes of the platform, the foundation, a glue laminated timber structure, or a glue lam for short, and we also have a roof covering, which is made of a hybrid combination between canvas and plant fiber biocomposite from the canaf plant. On the platform itself, we also have programs and furniture of modern iconic pieces, intermeshed with traditional materials such as rattan. And along the edges of the pavilion, along certain sides, we do have a showcase of the real canaf plant itself. So I wanted to talk a bit about design using sustainable materials as a background to what we do in our past projects or experiences. For the past 5 to 6 years, we have been involved in projects in India, and we began to be, in a way, inspired by what we saw in the everyday life. For example, you're able to get masala chai from terracotta cups, which are not single-use terracotta cups because they are recycled, they are crushed, mixed with mud, and then reformed or reused as new terracotta cups. The second image is food containers made from the sao leaf. So they place these leaves into a mold and they compact them, and road vendors use these as a biodegradable option to sell their street food. In the third image, we have been experimenting with rattan for the past 5 to 6 years. Rattan is one of the fastest growing species of non-timber finished product, and rattan in itself, the whole industry is very non-polluting because it does not require a lot of machinery or polluting chemicals in order to process the rattan. It can operate from a very small, modest mom and pop shop. As you can see from the image of the craftsman below. The fourth material, or the fourth project that that inspired us, was this residential house we did back 10 years ago in Japan. The structure is made of glue lam as well, and the whole structure was prefabricated offsite and erected in 2 days. So this is also the very same material from which we construct the Plus Pavilion. So one of the earliest schemes of the Plus Pavilion was still using the cross as inspiration, but we opted for a more modular slot-in assembly approach, which was more like a Lego of prefabricated panels, which we began to combine in different configurations to form structures. But we found that this was not utilizing the full capabilities of glue lam itself, because glue lam feature is that it's able to span across large distances without intermediate support. And so we began the next series of design iterations. The same thing as we took the Swiss cross, and then we began to form a diamond-shaped shelter or diamond-shaped structure. Why the diamond-shaped structure? Because we wanted to utilize triangulation as a form of stable geometric principle, and the diamond consists of two opposing triangles joined together, and we found that if we join them at 120 degrees at a certain corner, we are able to tile 3 modules together to form a sizable shelter. And with that, these 3 modules are able to proliferate itself by a tiling system. And in theory, we could begin to cover the whole donut of the Marina Barrage with this module. In the final configuration, the final design of the Plus Pavilion, we also thought about rainwater and drainage flow. So we had 2 levels of the roof on opposing ends, and that channels the water into a valley of sorts and drains off at both sides. So before we had the final scheme, we actually had 2 shortlisted shapes or structural configurations. One was a curve member configuration with a hole in the center. And the second was a nested member structure. The curve member structure was not as efficient as a nested structure because it required additional bracing in the center during fabrication. So eventually we did opt for the nesting structure, which is composed of two structural members, one smaller than the other, and being nested in next to under each other, right? Like a Russian matryoshka doll. So due to the budget as well as the time required for fabrication, we eventually opted for the nested structure. Right, so the Plus Pavilion itself, as I said, composes of different parts, and now I shall elaborate in some detail. So the platform that you see is also made from Hilti's modular system of bolt and nut, and it utilizes prefabricated parts that are not welded on site, and they're joined together by nuts and bolts to form a kind of base over the concrete foundation. As we're not allowed to penetrate through the concrete ground at Marina Barrage, we had a concrete foundation which formed as a counterweight to hold this whole pavilion. On top of this concrete foundation, we have steel I-beams from which you anchor the glue laminated timber structure. And in order to form the platform, we then utilize Hilti's platform base. And this was also covered or cladded in upcycled timber composite planks, which were to be thrown away. And so we gave them a second life by reusing them. The roof structure itself is a bit interesting because we wanted to move the pavilion from Marina Barrage to EHL in a couple of months. So the roof structure had to be easily mounted and dismountable. And so we opted for a hybrid of a canvas and plant fibers, biocomposite made from the canopy plant. This we call canopy, and this has been part of a year-long research, good design research sponsored by Design Singapore. We collaborated with Affordable Abodes to fabricate 60 of these roof eave shingles, as well as 4 panels of the central skylight. So the canopy biocomposite roof eave shingles is not just decorative. they are meant to channel rainwater away from the timber structure so that water does not backflow onto the timber. What we've also found out was that the central skylight, due to large lengths, about 1.2 meters, they were susceptible to minor warping, and so we kind of sandwich a galvanized mesh in between to prevent warping, and that allowed light also to filter through the center structure of the pavilion. Other parts that my studio was involved in was also collaborating with Vitra, using some of their products, for example, the cork stools, and we began to reinterpret the furniture in different ways or from a new perspective. So, for example, we began to stack up the cork stools and to form a cork tree in a sense. Cork in itself is a hydrophobic material, so and you know it's always commonly used in as wine stoppers. But cork in itself is a very sustainable material because you're able to harvest the bark from the cork tree without killing the tree itself. And we begin to work with the artisans in Malaysia, Singapore, to create these rattan structures. As you know, rattan is also one of the fastest growing plant species. And we are also able to give a new interpretation to traditional crafts. Another one of our collaborations was to create a rock and alley, which utilizes the Eames elephant, and combining them with a rattan rocking element to create a new product or whimsical product to attract the young ones and the young at heart. Throughout the whole design process, we also created a lot of 3D printed structures to analyze the form and to look at how the fabric as well as the different components would come together. As you see from the roof form, it's basically a series of straight lines, and that's called the roof surface. But with Herring's 5-axis CNC technology, we were able to create structural rafters which were gently curved in different directions. So if you do go underneath the pavilion structure, you're able to see this more subtle change in terms of geometry. In the whole construction process, we also did a lot of trial and tests. For example, like the central skylights, we had to dry lay them on the structure to get the correct form, to see that they fitted perfectly. The shingles themselves, they were also dyed with turmeric and krill to create a kind of ombre effect to the roof eave shingles. And there you can see Tim from Affordable Abodes applying binders to the canal fiber as well as to the galvanized mesh to create that central skylight. In the whole construction of the Vitra pieces as well, we also did work with local metal fabricators to form the internal structure, and all these parts came together from Malaysia, from Singapore, and were assembled to create the pieces, whimsical pieces that you see. I think the takeaway from this project was rather interesting, because we began to see that it was not just NGOs, SMEs coming together, but we also managed to incorporate large organizations, international firms, as well as banks, to and like-minded individuals to contribute to this effort in order to promote the idea of sustainability and also to educate the general public. Well, sustainability is a shared responsibility, and we think that everyone can play their part. And I think what we learned was how such small efforts could also create a physical manifestation of the Plus Pavilion. And we hope that this Plus Pavilion could also just be the starting point of the conversation and to engage different individuals and groups and to form part of this Plus network. Thank you.
Yes, hello again, everyone. So I'm happy to discuss today about the topic of Plus Pavilion, what I mentioned before in my introduction, as well as mass timber for a sustainable future. So if we dive right into it. First, introduction on Plus Pavilion. With the Plus Pavilion, we were exploring different ways on the future of sustainable construction. As you can see here, we had a collective of a lot of different partners. We had intersectoral collaboration. So we were not only looking at collaborations within the construction sector, but we were also looking at collaborations that were coming from outside the construction sector, but that will have a big impact as well. So the project was together with Affordable Abodes, Deloitte, EHL Singapore. We had the Embassy of Switzerland in Singapore as a very strong partner and the patron of the pavilion, basically. Then Herring, which is our company, Hilti, Marina Barrage, Nespresso, UBS Vitra, and Studio Sklim. Those were the collective partnerships on our project. So without further ado, video will sometimes talk more than me trying to explain something. So I want to start with our Plus Pavilion video, which you can enjoy now here. Right, so as you can see here, some of the premise and some of the areas that we were looking at within the Plus Pavilion was, why do we need to build different? And we were looking at some of the key areas. We don't say it's limited to those, but those are some of the areas that we really think it is important to look into in order to drive, in order to act more sustainably, and in order to collaborate more sustainably in the built environment. The first is, we need to do more sustainable design. We need to design for more efficient construction, which is what Singapore is doing, is DFMA, or design for manufacturing assembly. That means we try to pre-construct or prefabricate quite a lot of components off-site so that the on-site construction can be done much more efficiently with less resources. So in that sense, more sustainable as well. Then another area that for us is important to look into more is to design with more new materials. And what we mean with that is with new sustainable alternative materials, basically. Thirdly is the designing for greener operations. So that's also a task for the architects, as well as, of course, the engineers as well, to design buildings in a way that the energy efficiency consumption, once it is operational, can be kept and be reduced. Then the most sustainable one is basically the designing for repurpose, which means we are not building from scratch, but we try to repurpose existing structures. And the last point is, but not last but not least, is financing. And you see, we also have financial partners on our Plus Pavilion project, because without the finance backing behind it, which can really drive the power and the change within the whole industry, without financing, it's going to be very difficult to make a change. So financing sustainable buildings is also one of the very critical areas to look into. Now I start to introduce you a little bit towards the world of mass timber, or glue laminated timber, in short, glulam. Here I start just with a very quick video that you can get an idea what glulam is and how we are producing it. So I'm not having the sound on the video, I can explain. So we mainly use raw materials from sustainably managed forests, so that we are not promoting any sort of deforestation in any way. What you can see here is we are taking a very inhomogeneous material, and we have a very stringent process to get from this inhomogeneous material towards a homogeneous material, right? In this case, we call it glulam, or glue laminated timber. What you can see here is a very digitally controlled production process that we have in Switzerland. So we have the different lamellas that we are gluing together on this massive press, which then goes into 40-meter long CNC machinery. The CNC here is capable to do very complex shapes. It's a 5-axis CNC machinery, and you can see the components that can be produced and joined with it are massive in scale. So this is a very quick introduction, so you get an idea what glulam actually is, right? Now, when I go into our next slide, when we talk about sustainability, I think one of the very critical areas to look into is also circular economy. And what I mean by that is I would like to introduce today the concept of cascade usage. In the case of wood, we have the trees that grow in the forest, right? And once they grow, there is some process called photosynthesis. So through the photosynthesis process, when the tree grows, and basically it absorbs the carbon from the atmosphere. And the carbon stays in the biomass of the wood, even if you harvest the wood. So that means you can cut it, you can replant, make space for another tree that can capture again CO2, while the building product that we are building and processing with this raw material still has the CO2 inside. So once we have this, we go, let's say, into the sawmill that you can see on here. Then we give the product the first life cycle. Now this life cycle depends, of course, it could be 10 years, it could be 30 years, it could even be longer. Once this life cycle is over, that's not the end of it. So in wood, we have a cascade usage, which is usually about up to 5 levels. So you can give the wood up to 5 different life cycles after each other before, in the end, we would use it for energy purpose. So this is quite a very long-term sustainable cascade kind of circular economy usage. Yeah. Now, what I also want to highlight here is some of the very big benefits. I did a study here on the cradle to gate embodied carbon emissions from A1 to A3. So what that means is in life cycle analysis nowadays, architects as well as building owners, real estate developers, and other consultants are more and more concerned on the embodied carbon. But we can see here A1 to A3 is basically how much CO2 emission 1 cubic meter of a certain material emits up to the factory gate when the product is produced. So that means from raw material extraction, from the, whether it's an iron ore or whether it's going to be wood based. So it's extraction, transportation, then production up to the factory gate. And what's quite significant here is when you look at glulam or glue laminated timber or CLT, they are negative. So per cubic meter, we have actually negative of 600 kilogram CO2 emission. So we are positive for the environment in this case. Anything that's on the positive scale on this chart here is basically negative for the environment. So you see concrete with the different grades, they have an emission, right? They have an emission. And the steel, I even had to cut off somewhere because it goes up to 12,000 kilogram CO2 emission per cubic meter of material. I'm not saying we need to completely ban those non-sustainable materials, but we need to reduce them and potentially use more sustainable alternative materials. In my case here, I would propose we use more glulam and CLT. Now, just also on a few applications. So we had the Plus Pavilion, of course. We also do other very big structures. Here, this was the biggest timber structure in Asia, which we recently completed. We were responsible for one of these very big halls here, which was more than 90-meter free span, all done with this glued laminated timber. So the combination here was basically ETFE roof skin, and then we have an arc truss system, which you can see here. We use the benefit of both materials. We are combining wood or glulam together with steel in this hybrid structure. Now another project, because we always also push for try to use local resources where possible. So here we did the technology transfer to the King of Bhutan. Initially, they were asking us to produce in our plant in Switzerland, ship it over, but we were able to convince them, hey, listen, you have wood resources locally, why don't we use them? So what we did is we set up a pilot plant at more than 3,000 meters above sea level, quite challenging environment, but in the end, the structure that you see here on the left side is all produced locally with local materials, thanks to our technology transfer that we did here towards Bhutan. Now, very recently, we did an event dome. This is one of our patented systems that we started to develop since the 80s. Then the requirements and the projects got always bigger and bigger and bigger. And then recently we did an event dome. The event dome here on the bottom left and on the right side, you can see is 46 meters in diameter. And what we are doing here is we own it and we rent it out. So it's truly circular. We rent it out to events. It's all purely made of sustainable glulam with the steel connections in between, of course. And then once the event is over, we take it back and then we can rent it out to another one. So it's very circular reusability. It's designed for disassembly. And yeah, that's this interesting concept here behind it. If you look into the future and what's happening is mass timber also goes very strongly towards new heights. On the left side, you see 8-story building that we completed last year for the Ministry of Environment in Switzerland. It was an 8-story structure. There we are combining glulam post beam system together with a concrete system. So we always say it's good to try to do hybridization if it's possible. On the right-hand side, you can see another development in the timber world, which will be done in 2026. It will be the tallest residential mass timber tower. It's proposed in area near Zurich, yeah, so more than 100 meters. So you can see it's quite significant actually in terms of scalability, what you can achieve with new renewable alternative materials such as glued laminated timber. So that's it from my side here. Here is also acknowledgement of our event partner, the Circle for Human Sustainability, which Catherine Loke is heading. And then we also would like to acknowledge our Plus Pavilion partners and also Marina Barrage, because without them, we wouldn't have the venue that we did this presentation, and we wouldn't be able to talk about Plus Pavilion. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to stay in touch.
Thanks, everyone, for watching and staying with us all this time. We hope that the information that we've given you really enables you to ask the right questions and decide how you're going to get on the right path towards sustainability. Just to conclude, maybe I can get the speakers to share any more final insights. Nick, would you like to start?
Yeah. So I think sorry. Maybe you can get Jay to start this one first.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, so really, truly what we're trying to do at Beauty World Center is, as I've mentioned earlier, is to create a platform for people to come together, to exchange ideas, to learn from one another, and truly to understand how food waste can be recycled through composting. And from there, the compost could then, fertilize plants, and plants produce edible parts for us to consume. And the parts that we do not consume goes back into the compost system, forming a food loop. I think it's quite important that we understand that no matter how small our actions are, whether it's an individual or a small household who's contributing their food waste to the farm, right? It all actually adds up, and actually it helps in helping our whole ecosystem, understanding that there's nothing such as waste in nature. Everything is actually recycled. So I hope that is the take back from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Jay. Nick, have you thought about what to say?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't be afraid of such agents. With this day and age, as we get more urbanized, we shouldn't lose our roots to all these natural cycles that occur in the ground that I think a lot of us are getting very detached from as we start to work in offices and in comfort. So there's nothing much to be afraid. I think really people have got to, I think everybody has got to learn how to experience all this. Yeah, so can visit our farm and then, yeah, give it a try.
Any concluding thoughts? Tim?
Oh, yeah. So I think we've explored some ideas on some concepts on how to build with circularity, right? Using various components of renewable components, which we can actually plant. But we also have to think about, the entire circle of life. So that's where, farming sustainably also comes in. So, help, come journey with us and explore new ways of building and new ways of feeding ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks. Kevin?
Thanks for listening. I think we all have to realize that, personally for me, I think sustainability is not a destination. It's more an attitude and a responsibility that we all should have, because I think it's an urgent call for everyone to play their part. And in this small project that we did of the Plus Pavilion, I think it has been a bottom-up process where all of us and small companies, NGOs, non-profits, even big banks and all that got together to drive across a message and hoping to educate the next generation, because that is really urgent that we need to address this situation now. We need to look at alternatives in terms of building materials that do not contribute or harm the environment. And the materials are all around us, and we can learn from developing countries as well, because sustainability is part of their everyday life. They do not have the alternative. They are just using things that they find around them and from Mother Earth. So I think we can learn from such countries instead of just looking towards high-tech solutions all the time. We can look at primitive influences as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Laurent?
So to wrap up from my side, I hope my presentation was able to give you a bit a new lens, how you can look into ways to make construction more sustainable, whether it's through collaborations, efforts of different parties. So we call it the sum of parts to make a more tangible impact. Moreover, the Plus Pavilion, it will move to the EHL campus in Singapore on the 10th of August. If you are interested to get a hands-on experience, it will still be at Marina Barrage until the 10th of August. So National Day Parade, it's your chance to go and feel and touch to get a tangible sense of sustainability. Otherwise, reach out to one of us and we will be happy to share more information or potentially even have a private discussion with you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Laurent. So just to conclude, my thoughts actually, I've grown up in a city. I guess I'm a city girl all my life. And only now in the last few months when I went to Jay's and Nicholas's farm at Beauty World Center, I learned a lot. But the most important thing actually, I learned that in the city, we intellectualize the idea of sustainability too much. And to us, it's some kind of distant concept. Oh, you need to recycle, don't use plastic, whatever. Actually, it's not. It's actually very, very close to our hearts and very close to our nature. We are part of nature. So what I learned actually is when you touch the ground, you feel it. It does something to you psychologically. It becomes a part of you. It's really not some esoteric or intellectual exercise. So I would think that for everyone to really benefit from whatever we've said today, go and involve yourself in something, find an urban farm nearby or even start one yourself. If you want help starting one, come and contact us because we have a network of people, so we can always put the right people together. If you have land that you want to offer to use for an urban farm, you don't know how to farm, but you have land, then we can always pull you, put you in contact with the farmer. So there are many ways. If you have if your company wants to sponsor any farm as well, we can also get you together. If you want to know more or you want to contact us, you can email us at contact@tchs-global.org. So we will put the email address in the final slide as well. And sustainability really is a holistic thing. And individually, we cannot do very much, but if we all work together and we're in sync with each other, then we can actually do a lot and we can make a huge change to the world. So hope you all enjoyed the talk, and we're going to be organizing many more. So see you next time. So bye, everybody.